Russians are sick and tired of Putin's reign, and now the whole nation has begun to turn against him.
In Russia, dozens of protesters have been arrested after clashes with riot police in the central region of Bashkortostan.
Anti-government protests erupted in the far eastern city of Khabarovsk on Saturday. Thousands gathered in a central square and shouted "Shame on Moscow, Putin's a thief," and "Down with the Tsar."
Despite watching their country slowly fall apart over the years, most Russians kept their frustrations to themselves. But now things have finally shifted. The pressure has built up, and everyone is starting to speak out. This includes not only civilians, but also soldiers and war reporters who once heavily backed the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin, the man who seemed untouchable for so long, is now losing his grip on power, slowly and steadily. In this video, we'll examine how the people's quiet frustration is escalating into something louder, and we'll dive into the many small moments that have ultimately led us to this boiling point. For a long time, Putin was the face of Russia's comeback. After the chaos of the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell apart and the country felt humiliated, he stepped in with a promise. He'd bring pride back. He'd make Russia strong again. And for a while, it looked like he was delivering. He was the tough guy, a former KGB officer, always in control, staring down the West. People saw him on TV, riding horses, meeting world leaders, and they believed he was the one holding it all together. To solidify this, their economy grew in the 2000s. Oil prices were high and money flowed. Cities got shinier, pensions got paid, and for many Russians, that was enough. They didn't ask too many questions because their life was better than it had been before. Putin wasn't just a leader, he was the guy who made Russia feel like Russia again. Putin kept doubling down on his image, and back in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, his popularity shot through the roof. People were proud. They saw it as taking back what was rightfully theirs, standing up to the West, and showing the world that Russia wasn't weak anymore. Polls from that time showed his approval rating hitting 80% or higher. The streets were full of flags and patriotic songs. It wasn't just about Crimea, it was about feeling like winners again. Putin knew how to play that card. State TV pumped out images of him as the strongman who could do no wrong. And even when things got messy, like sanctions from the West or protests from activists, he brushed it off. The system was tight. The media was his. The police were loyal. For most Russians, he was the only option, and they were okay with that. But that was then, and now things feel different. The pride from Crimea has since faded. The promise of strength and stability are starting to crack, and those same people aren't waving flags as much anymore. They're standing in lines at grocery stores, watching prices climb. They're checking their bank accounts, wondering about how to pay rent. They're hearing about sons and brothers sent to a war that was supposed to be over in days, but has dragged on for years. Put plainly, those once patriotic people are now struggling badly. The news doesn't talk about victory anymore. It talks about strategic adjustments or temporary setbacks. Even the most loyal supporters are starting to ask questions. Not loud, not in the streets, but at home, over tea, in hushed voices. What's going on? Why is this taking so long? Why does it feel like we are the ones paying the price? Now, whenever we talk about issues like these, Russian bots are quick to dislike the video to kill its reach. That's why if you can please take a second to hit that like and that subscribe button down below, it really does help us out tremendously. We appreciate all of you. Let's zoom in on the war in Ukraine, because it's the spark that's setting everything else on fire. When the invasion kicked off in 2022, the Kremlin sold it as a quick job, a special military operation to take Kyiv in days, maybe a couple of weeks tops. State TV promised a clean victory, and a lot of Russians bought it. They thought Russia's massive army would roll right over Ukraine. Why wouldn't they? Putin has always delivered before, and the memory of Crimea's annexation in 2014 was still fresh. But that was over 3 years ago. The quick win never happened. Instead, the war turned into a long, ugly slog, eating up lives, money, and hope. Even the way the war was marketed shows how deep the disconnect is. Russian media flooded airwaves with scenes of soldiers giving candy to children and waving flags from tanks. But what many families got were vague phone calls, followed by silence, and then a death notice. That gap between what was shown and what's real is fueling quiet rage. Seeing the desperation of the situation, Putin rolled out plans for a full-on summer offensive in May of this year, aiming to grab more land in Ukraine's Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Some even whispered about pushing all the way to Odessa before the autumn rains turn the roads into mud. It sounded bold, like a chance to turn things around. There were rumors of North Korean troops training to take over border guard duties, freeing up Russian soldiers for the front. The general staff was banking on fresh recruits, heavy firepower, and a bit of luck to break Ukraine's defenses. But it's not really working out that way. The reality on the ground is a mess, and it's getting harder to hide just how outmatched Russia really is. This chaos is why military voices are speaking up, and they're not happy. Military analysts like Maxim Kalishnikov, great name by the way, who used to cheer for the war, are now calling this offensive a fantasy. They say it's falling apart before it even produced results, and it's not hard to see why they're bashing the same regime that they used to support. Everything is going wrong, and it all comes down to blunders and overconfidence. For starters, despite launching this offensive, the Air Force, once a symbol of Russia's might, has been struggling for quite some time. Pilots are overworked, coordination is sloppy, and Ukraine's air defenses are too strong. At the same time, there's a drone war. Ukraine's turning the skies into a death trap. Small drones, some handmade, zip through the battlefield, dropping explosives on tanks, trucks, and even soldiers. The Russians call it the death zone, a stretch of land so dangerous that moving forward feels like signing your death warrant. 3 soldiers go in, 2 don't come back, and the one who does is lucky to find a trench. Ukraine's glide bombs, like the Asim Hammer, bombs from France, are cheap but deadly. They're tearing through Russian positions, and Russia's air cover can't keep up. These tactics are killing Russian troops in staggering numbers. Since the summer offensive started, over 31,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, according to Ukrainian estimates. All those deaths in just a few months? Can you imagine that? Add to that the estimated 1 million casualties that Russia has suffered since 2022. That's a whole generation of young men gone. Families are getting notices about sons and brothers, and cemeteries are running out of space. Social media is full of videos from soldiers not celebrating wins, but begging for supplies or cursing orders that make no sense. Much like the initial invasion itself, Russia's summer attack was meant to show strength, but it's turning into a huge mistake. Tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have died. And for what? Just a few small villages and barely any land? It's not just sad, it's flat out embarrassing for Putin. Once again, he has started a big war with big promises, but has ended up with big losses. It's just a few months into the campaign that the Kremlin made a huge deal out of. And already, people everywhere are asking, why keep fighting when nothing is being gained? And that's exactly why this summer offensive isn't just another chapter in the war. It's the moment everything either holds together or starts to fall apart. For Putin, it's not about gaining ground anymore. It's about proving that the system he built can still function under pressure, that the military still listens, and that the economy can still support a war. If this last push fails, it won't just be a setback on the battlefield, it will be his last chance turned to dust. It'll be a signal that the machinery behind Russia, the leadership, the institutions, the entire structure is no longer working. It will be the final proof of what the people in Russia already know in their hearts. You see, this isn't just a military operation, it's a deadline, a countdown to either reassert control or face the consequences of losing it, and everyone inside of the Kremlin knows it. Another sad thing about this summer offensive is the way the war is being fought in the first place. Russia's military is stuck in the past, using tactics from the Soviet era that don't work against Ukraine's modern playbook. Corruption makes it worse. Officers pocket funds meant for equipment, leaving soldiers with junk. Nepotism puts connected people in charge, not skilled ones. Then there's the meat assaults. These are small groups of 3 or 4 soldiers, often barely trained, sent to storm Ukrainian trenches. The name says it all. These men are cannon fodder, thrown into the fight with old rifles and no backup. Tanks and equipment are another problem. Russia's lost over half of its modern tanks, at least 4,000 since the war started, according to Oryx reports. Now they're pulling out Cold War relics, rusty T-62s from the 1960s, which are no match for Ukraine's drones and missiles. These are the stories that are echoed back home by the few veterans who made it back, and they become hushed whispers spoken by the masses about Putin's war. Ukraine is not standing still. They're getting better. Faster drones, smarter tactics, and more weapons from the West. Russia is trying to cut them down by launching up to 500 Shahid drones at night, trying to overwhelm Ukraine's defenses. But Ukraine's drone wall, consisting of a network of sensors and jammers, is holding strong. They're hitting Russian supply lines, blowing up fuel depots and trucks deep behind the front. Russia's losing drones faster than it can build them, and they're not cheap. It's a technological arms race, and Russia's falling behind. Even when pro-war bloggers start mocking the general staff's plans, you know the problems are pretty deeply rooted. And this isn't just about soldiers or bloggers. Everyone is affected. The war is hitting home in ways that are hard to ignore. Let's talk about the economy, because that's where the pain is spreading fast. The war is bleeding Russia dry, and the economy is feeling the pain. War costs money, after all. Think of the tanks, missiles, soldiers, pay, and everything in between that needs to be covered. In 2025, defense spending hit 6.3% of GDP, a third of the budget. For comparison, most countries spend 1 or 2% on their military. Russia's going all in, and it's not hard to see why. They need to keep the war machine running. But that money has to come from somewhere, and it's coming out of ordinary people's pockets. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, meant to cushion tough times, is down to 4 trillion rubles, about $40 billion. That's really not very much when you're fighting a war and trying to keep the lights on at home. The budget deficit's another warning sign, revised to 1.7% of GDP, 3 times what it was planned. Basically, money's tight, and it's being reflected everywhere. Just look at what's happening in stores and homes as another example of this. Inflation is out of control. Prices for basic things like bread, milk, and eggs are climbing fast. In June of 2025, housing sales dropped 55% compared to the year before. That's not just a number. It's a sign that people are getting scared. They're not buying homes because they don't know if they'll have jobs tomorrow. Construction, one of the biggest industries in Russia, is tanking. New housing projects are down 22%. Developers are losing money, and workers are losing jobs. That's thousands of families wondering how they'll pay the bills. Then there's the cost of borrowing. Interest rates are at 21%. Think about what that means. If you want a loan for a car, a house, or even a small business, you're paying through the nose. Most people can't afford it, so they don't borrow. Businesses can't grow. Investment is drying up. Even rent is getting out of hand, as it's up over 30% in the last year. For a lot of Russians, that's the difference between making ends meet and falling behind. It's not like the government is stepping in to help. Subsidies for things like housing or utilities are being cut back. The safety net is unraveling, and people are feeling it. It's not just numbers on a page, it's real life. Walk into any Russian city and you'll hear the same stories. Groceries cost more every week, and it's not just food alone. Utility bills are climbing too. Gas, electricity, and heating costs are up across the board. In some regions, power outages are becoming common because the infrastructure is old and there's no money to fix it. In January of 2025, a report from the Russian Energy Ministry admitted that 40% of the country's power grids need major repairs. But with the war eating up the budget, those repairs aren't happening. Imagine trying to keep your house warm in a Siberian winter when the power cuts off for hours. People are frustrated and cold, and they're starting to point their fingers at the government. Another sign of the dire state of affairs with Russia's economy is the lack of sufficient healthcare. Put simply, hospitals are short on supplies. Basic things like bandages, syringes, or antibiotics are hard to find, especially outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. A 2024 study by the Russian Academy of Sciences found that 30% of rural clinics don't have enough medicine to treat common illnesses. If you need something specific like insulin or heart medication, good luck. People are traveling hours to bigger cities, hoping to find a pharmacy that's stocked. For older Russians, this is a nightmare. Pensions haven't kept up with inflation, and most are around 20,000 rubles a month, which is about $200 at current exchange rates. That's barely enough for rent and food, let alone medicine. Social media is full of stories about pensioners begging for help or rationing their pills to make them last. These people are not cheering for Putin anymore. They're just trying to get by. Now, couple these daily concerns of survival with something else: conscription. In places like Dagestan and Buryatia, anger is rising over conscription. These regions are poor, and yet they're the ones sending the most soldiers to die. Mothers have marched in protest, demanding answers. Videos of grieving families are spreading fast, even though state media tries to ignore them. The Kremlin thought these voices were small, but when the small voices speak together, they grow loud. However, the fact is that the war needs soldiers, and the Kremlin insensitively keeps calling up more. In 2022, Putin ordered a partial mobilization, sending 300,000 men to the front. It caused panic as hundreds of thousands fled the country, clogging airports and border crossings. Since then, the draft hasn't stopped. Every few months, there's talk of another wave. Families are terrified their sons will be next. In some villages, young men are hiding or moving to cities to avoid recruiters. Others are trying to get exemptions, but those often cost bribes that most can't afford. A 2025 survey by the independent Levada Center found that 60% of Russians with draft-aged sons are very concerned about conscription. That fear hangs over every household. Young people are feeling it too, but their response is different. A lot of them want out. Not just out of the war, but out of Russia. In 2023 and 2024, an estimated 1.3 million people left the country, according to data from Russia's own migration services. Many were young, educated, and skilled, with most of them being programmers, engineers, and teachers. These are the people Russia needs to keep the economy going, but they're giving up. They're heading to places like Georgia, Armenia, or Turkey, where they can work without worrying about a draft notice. The ones who are staying are keeping quiet, but you can see it in their faces. They're not posting patriotic slogans anymore. They're sharing memes about how nothing works or videos of stores with empty shelves. It's not just rebellion that we're seeing, it's resignation. This sentiment of resignation is so strong that you can feel the mood shifting online. Social media platforms like Telegram and VK are buzzing with complaints. People post about long lines at ATMs because banks are limiting cash withdrawals. They share clips of local officials promising help that never comes. Just look at this video showing a man in a small town holding a blank sign in a silent protest. He gets arrested for illegal activities without doing anything wrong. That's the deplorable state that Russia is in now.
Повторяю, требую прекратить ваши противоправные действия. Домой.
Продолжаем.
Продолжайте.
Куда вы его толкаете?
Все, забрали.
That kind of silent protest thing is happening more often. It's not organized, and it's not big enough to call a movement, but it's a sign that people are testing the limits. They're not as afraid as they used to be, or maybe they're just too fed up to care. Even the elites are getting nervous. These are the people who built their fortunes under Putin. The businessmen, the officials, the ones who own the big mansions, jets, and yachts. They're not stupid. They see the economy wobbling. They hear the grumbling from the streets. A lot of them are quietly moving their money out of Russia. Some are sending their families abroad to Dubai, Turkey, practically anywhere but Moscow. A poll by the Levada Center showed 51% of Russians felt negative about those who left. But that's just proving the point. People are leaving and it's causing tension. The ones who stay are starting to resent the ones who can afford to go. This scrutiny isn't even limited to people. Even nations are showing signs of it. Putin's international friends are now keeping their distance, almost as if they have sensed the demise of Putin's regime. China, once seen as Russia's silent partner, has started shifting its tone. While it still buys Russian oil, it's cautious. No direct military support, no joint push, just silence. And that silence says a lot. It's the kind of silence that means you're on your own, man. Don't get me wrong, though, this isn't a story about everyone suddenly turning into rebels. Russia's not at that point. The system is still strong. Police are everywhere, and the courts are quick to punish anyone who steps out of line. Just look at the numbers. In 2024, over 20,000 people were arrested for discrediting the military, according to OVD Info, a human rights group. And that could mean anything from posting anti-war messages to just liking the wrong tweet. The government's grip is tight, and state TV still pumps out the same old story. Putin's in charge, the West is the enemy, and Russia will win. But rifts are showing, and they're getting harder to hide. Despite that strong hand on his people, quite frankly speaking, the Kremlin is running out of options. They can't win the war without a miracle, but they can't quit either. Pulling out would mean admitting defeat, and that's something Putin can't afford. His whole image is built on strength. If he backs down, he looks weak, and in Russia, weakness is a death sentence for a leader like him. The hope seems to be that the West will just get tired first, that Europe and the US will stop sending weapons to Ukraine. But so far, that's not happening. NATO's committed, and Ukraine's not giving up. Every month, Russia's position gets worse. People are starting to see through the propaganda. State TV can only spin so much before it stops making sense. When you're told the war is going great, but your cousin comes back in a coffin, you start to wonder, Who's lying? With everything collapsing around him, as we are seeing, that's precisely why this summer offensive that we touched on earlier matters so much to Putin. It's not just about territory, it's about momentum. If Russia can't show progress now, it risks losing the narrative entirely. And once that slips, it's hard to get back. People will start asking questions. Allies start hedging their bets. The bureaucracy starts stalling. And the whole system begins to drift. There's also the timing. Autumn brings rain, mud, and logistical nightmares. Winter brings fuel shortages and budget strain. If Putin doesn't get the results before then, he'll be forced into a defensive posture both politically and militarily. That's dangerous. Because once you're reacting instead of leading, you're vulnerable. And in a system built on one man's image, vulnerability is the one thing that can't be shown. In a 2025 poll by the Levada Center, only 27% of Russians say they fully trust the government, down from 53% in 2020. That's a big drop. It doesn't mean that they're ready to storm the Kremlin, but it means the spell is breaking. What we're seeing isn't about a big, dramatic uprising. It's not about crowds in the streets or tanks rolling into Moscow. It's about something quieter, but just as powerful. Trust is slipping away. Soldiers don't trust their commanders. Citizens don't trust the news. Even the elites don't trust the future. There simply is no trust. And when trust goes, it's hard to get back. Systems like Russia's don't fall apart overnight. They erode slowly, piece by piece, until one day the weight becomes too much. Nobody knows when that day will come, but the signs are everywhere. The economy's cracking, the war is failing, the people are drifting away. And when a system built on one man starts to hollow out, it doesn't take much to make it collapse. The fact of the matter is that collapse won't come with a bang. It'll come with silence. And the silence has already started.